Hello, this is Christopher from Defeat Modernism. In this video, I'm going to cover, as you can tell, the plot against the church that was released by Pope Pius IX. I'm going to have the editor of Catholic Family News, the late John Veneri, go over that point in a moment in more detail. But in this video, I will read the entire document that the Pope had published. I am going to provide you with quotes from Our Lady about Freemasonry, from other popes. I'm going to go over in more detail the account that St. Maximilian Kolbe made from that very first quote that you saw in the beginning of this video. He goes into much more detail about what happened in that event, what was being said, what was on the banners, and from there I will also tie in some more recent Masonic publications, articles dealing directly with what I would say are anti-popes since John the 23rd. And there'll be a few other things I'll cover as well. And so let me start with this very quick clip from the late John Veneri on how the church came upon these documents and what was the end result of that.
The secret papers of the Alta Vendita fell in the hands of Pope Gregory XVI, who reigned between 1831 and 1846, and the papers embrace a period that go from 1820 to 1846. Later on, as I said earlier, at the request of Venerable Pope Pius IX, they were published by Cretino Joly in a book called The Roman Church and the Revolution. Now, Venerable Pope Pius IX himself guaranteed the authenticity of these documents in a brief approbation which he addressed to the author on February 25, 1861. The full text of the Alta Vendita is also available in English, the entire thing, in this book here, Grand Orient Freemasonry Unmasked, by Monsignor George Dillon. It's printed by Omni Publications. It has an introduction by Father Fahey, but it was originally printed last century. And when Pope Leo XIII was presented with a copy of this book, of Monsignor Dillon's book, back in the late 1800s, Pope Leo was so impressed that he'd ordered an Italian version of this book to be published at his own expense. Now here, Pope Leo XIII was only being true to his great anti-Freemasonry encyclical Humanum Genus, where in that encyclical he called upon Catholic leaders to, and this is a quote from him, to tear off the mask of Freemasonry and make plain to all what it really is. So the publication of these documents is a means of tearing off the mask. Now
I have on the screen that book that John Veneri had mentioned, Grand Orient Freemasonry Unmasked, as a secret power behind communism, by Monsignor George Dillon. I do have the entire book posted as an audiobook on my channel. The name of the playlist on my channel is War of Antichrist, because that was the original name of the book. War of Antichrist, Freemasonry Unmasked as the power behind communism. And so this goes very deep into all of this. There's 27 or so chapters of it, and I definitely recommend either reading it or listening to it on your own. I'm going to read the end piece of the chapter on the permanent instruction of the Alta Vendita, because Monsignor Dillon gives a little bit more background on it in that particular chapter, and then I'll go into reading the entire document itself. But before I even do that, I want to explain that Our Lady actually warned about Freemasonry well before it was even officially created. You know, we'd say 1717 is what the Masons say, but it really goes all the way back to the mystery schools. You could say Babylon, that Babylonian captivity of the Jews where they were worshiping other gods. That's where the rites of the Kabbalah come in. And then essentially you have a blending of the Talmudic Judaism and the Kabbalah, which is essentially Satanism, Lucifer worship. And it is what is the power behind Freemasonry, and then ultimately Freemasonry spreading communism, which was created by the Jew Karl Marx, who was a Satanist in his own words. And now that is the plan to eliminate Christianity, the Christian idea. But first, the Freemasons realized that they weren't going to be successful if they attacked the church from the outside, because everyone who tried to failed. So they realized they had to come inside the church, corrupt it, to then subvert it. And really, in doing that, they destroy it. Because if you think you're Catholic, but you're actually practicing Masonic ideals, well, then you've actually lost the faith without even knowing it. And this document is going to go into how they accomplish it. But I'm just going to put a couple of quotes up on the screen from Our Lady of Good Success, who warned about Freemasonry. I do have videos on that subject as well. I'll put on the screen now that playlists. I would also highly recommend learning more about that, because it speaks about the period of time we're living in. Those first two titles on the playlist that you see come from the magazine, the publication Chiesa Viva. So if you enjoyed the videos on the diabolical secret of the new Mass of Paul VI, you will love that. I do narrate both of those videos. The third one, Prophecies of Our Lady of Good Success, is a half-hour radio interview. So definitely check those out. But let's look at just two quotes from Our Lady of Good Success. And this is a approved apparition. Mother Mariana, who was the seer, her body is incorrupt, in Quito, Ecuador. So let's start with this first quote. Satan will reign almost completely by means of the Masonic sects. And that was in the year 1610. So what Our Lady's talking about here in these messages to Mother Mariana, she's talking about what's going to befall the world beginning in the 20th century. And so if you recall, I mean, the beginning of the 20th century was World War I, World War II, and the apparitions of Fatima, the Russian Revolution, all of these things really helped to further destroy Christendom, further destroy the power of the papacy. The Catholic monarchies were basically destroyed by the Freemasons at that point. This is all part of their plan. And Our Lady was warning about this. In this next quote, what I'll put on the screen now, Our Lady states, "This knowledge will only become known to the general public in the 20th century. During that epoch, the Church will find herself attacked by terrible hordes of the Masonic sect." So here, Our Lady is, again, she's predicting what is going to happen, and it has come to pass. We've seen the Masonic principles enshrined in the Second Vatican Council documents, and then Masonic rites being put into place in the new Mass. And that was covered in that last video I did on the new Mass of Paul VI. I'll cover it in an upcoming video I'm working on as well, about the new Mass and Protestantism, and I have a couple of videos coming out on that, hopefully within the next few weeks, if not sooner. But on this note, what I want to do is I want to just read that clip from Grand Orient Freemasonry Unmasked. It's going to give a little bit more background on where these documents came from, and then I will read the document itself, which is only a few pages, and then come back with some additional information. So Monsignor Dillon says, this document reveals the whole line of action followed since by the Italian revolutionists. It gives also a fair insight into tactics with which other European countries have been made familiar by Freemasonry generally. But we are in possession of what appears to me a still more striking document written for the benefit of the Piemontese lodges of the Carbonari by one of the Alta Vendita, whose pseudonym was Piccolo Tigre, Little Tiger. I may here mention that the custom of taking these fanciful appellations has been common to the secret societies from the very beginning. Arouet became Voltaire. The notorious Baron Nige was called Philo. Baron Ditford was called Minos, a custom adopted by the principal chiefs of the dark atheistic conspiracy then and since. The first leader or grand chief of the Alta Vendita was a corrupt Italian nobleman who took the name of Nubius. From such documents as he, before his death, managed, in revenge for being sacrificed by the party of Mazzini, as we shall see, to have communicated to the authorities of Rome, or which were found by the vigilance of the Roman detective police. We find that his funds, and the funds for carrying on the deep and dark conspiracy in which he and his confederates were engaged, came chiefly from rich German Jews. Jews, in fact, from the commencement, played always a prominent part in the conspiracies of atheism. They do so still. Piccolo Tigre, who seems to have been the most active agent of Nubius, was a Jew. He traveled under the appearance of an itinerant banker and jeweler. This character of moneylender or usurer disarmed suspicion regarding himself and such of his confederates as he had occasion to call upon in his peregrinations. Of course, he had the protection of the Masonic body everywhere. The most desperate revolutionists were generally the most desperate scoundrels otherwise. They were gamblers, spendthrifts, and the very class with which a usurer's Jew would be expected to have money dealings. Piccolo Tigre thus traveled safely and brought safely to the superior lodges of the Carbonari such instructions as the Alta Vendita thought proper to give. In the document referred to, which I shall now read for you, it will be seen how anxious the secret directory were to make use of the common form of Masonry, notwithstanding the contempt they had for the bons vivants, who only learned from the craft how to become drunkards and liberals. Beyond the Masons, and unknown to them, though formed generally from them, lay the deadly secret conclave which, nevertheless, used and directed them for the ruin of the world and of their own selves. The next chapter contains a translation of the document, or instructions, as it was called, addressed by Piccolo Tigre to the Piemontese lodges of the Carbonari. Now, I'm not going to read that letter. If you want to read that, just go to my playlists that I mentioned before, War Against Antichrist. But this just gives you a little bit more background on where this document came from, who is behind it, and you can see, again, Monsignor Dillon mentions the Jews. So this ties into that 1890 Jesuit article I covered in a video a week or so ago. So I hope it's becoming more and more clear for those of you who maybe this is the first time you're ever hearing or reading or seeing anything like this. So now, with that backdrop, Let me go to the article itself. So we'll read the entire permanent instruction of the Alta Vendita. And again, this was the document the church had published because of how horrified they were at the plot. And then once I finish reading that, I will come back and we'll get some other quotes from saints and popes and some other additional information. Ever since we have established ourselves as a body of action, and that order has commenced to reign in the bosom of the most distant lodge, as in that one nearest the center of action, there is one thought which has profoundly occupied the men who aspire to universal regeneration. That is the thought of the enfranchisement of Italy, from which must one day come the enfranchisement of the entire world, the fraternal republic, and the harmony of humanity. That thought has not yet been seized upon by our brethren beyond the Alps. They believe that revolutionary Italy can only conspire in the shade, deal some strokes of the poignard to sbirri and traitors, and tranquilly undergo the yoke of events which take place beyond the Alps for Italy, but without Italy. This error has been fatal to us on many occasions. It is not necessary to combat it with phrases which we only to propagate it. It is necessary to kill it by facts. Thus, amidst the cares which have the privilege of agitating the minds of the most vigorous of our lodges, there is one which we ought never forget. The Papacy has at all times exercised a decisive action upon the affairs of Italy. By the hands, by the voices, by the pens, by the hearts of its innumerable bishops, priests, monks, nuns, and people in all latitudes, the Papacy finds devotedness without end ready for martyrdom, and that to enthusiasm. Everywhere, whenever it pleases to call upon them, it has friends ready to die or lose all for its cause. This is an immense leverage which the popes alone have been able to appreciate to its full power, and as yet they have used it only to a certain extent. Today, there is no question of reconstituting for ourselves that power, the prestige of which is for the moment weakened. Our final end is that of Voltaire and of the French Revolution, the destruction forever of Catholicism and even of the Christian idea, which, if left standing on the ruins of Rome, would be the resuscitation of Christianity later on. But to attain more certainly that result, and not prepare ourselves with gaiety of heart for reverses which adjourn indefinitely or compromise for ages the success of a good cause, we must not pay attention to those braggarts of Frenchmen, those cloudy Germans, those melancholy Englishmen, all of whom imagine they can kill Catholicism, now with an impure song, then with an illogical deduction, at another time with a sarcasm smuggled in like the cottons of Great Britain. Catholicism has a life much more tenacious than that. It has seen the most implacable, the most terrible adversaries, and it has often had the malignant pleasure of throwing holy water on the tombs of the most enraged. Let us permit, then, our brethren of these countries to give themselves up to the sterile intemperance of their anti-Catholic zeal. Let them even mock at our Madonnas and our apparent devotion. With this passport, we can conspire at our ease and arrive little by little at the end we have in view. Now, the Papacy has been, for 17 centuries, inherent to the history of Italy. Italy cannot breathe or move without the permission of the Supreme Pastor. With him, she has the 100 arms of Brarius. Without him, she is condemned to a pitiable She has nothing but divisions to foment, hatreds to break out, and hostilities to manifest themselves from the highest chain of the Alps to the lowest of the Apennines. We cannot desire such a state of things. It is necessary, then, to seek a remedy for that situation. The remedy is found. The Pope, whoever he may be, will never come to the secret societies. It is for the secret societies to come first to the Church, in the resolve to conquer the two. The work which we have undertaken is not the work of a day, nor of a month, nor of a year. It may last many years, a century perhaps, but in our ranks the soldier dies and the fight continues. We do not mean to win the popes to our cause, to make them neophytes of our principles and propagators of our ideas. That would be a ridiculous dream, no matter in what manner events may turn. Should cardinals or prelates, for example, enter willingly or by surprise, in some manner, into a part of our secrets, it would be by no means a motive to desire their elevation to the See of Peter. That elevation would destroy us. Ambition alone would bring them to apostasy from us. The needs of power would force them to immolate us. That which we ought to demand, that which we should seek and expect, as the Jews expect the Messiah, is a pope according to our wants. Alexander VI, with all his private crimes, would not suit us, for he never erred in religious matters. Clement XIV, on the contrary, would suit us from head to foot. Borgia was a libertine, a true sensualist of the 18th century, strayed into the 15th. He has been anathematized, notwithstanding his vices, by all the voices of philosophy and incredulity, and he owes that anathema to the vigor with which he defended the Church. Ganganelli gave himself over, bound hand and foot, to the ministers of the Bourbons, who made him afraid, and to the incredulous who celebrated his tolerance. And Ganganelli is become a very great pope. He is almost in the same condition that it is necessary for us to find another, if that be yet possible. With that, we should march more surely to the attack upon the Church than with the pamphlets of our brethren in France, or even with the gold of England. Do you wish to know the reason? It is because, by that, we should have no more need of the vinegar of Hannibal, no more need the powder of cannon, no more need even of our arms. We have the little finger of the successor of St. Peter engaged in the plot, and that little finger is of more value for our crusade than all the Innocents, the Urbans, and the St. Bernards of Christianity. We do not doubt that we shall arrive at that supreme term of all our efforts, but when? But how? The unknown does not yet manifest itself. Nevertheless, as nothing should separate us from the plan traced out, as, on the contrary, all things should tend to it, as if success were to crown the work scarcely sketched out tomorrow, we wish in this instruction, which must rest a secret for the simple initiated, to give to those of the Supreme Lodge counsels with which they should enlighten the universality of the brethren, under the form of an instruction or memorandum. It is of special importance, and because of a discretion, the motives of which are transparent, never to permit it to be felt that these counsels are orders emanating from the Alta Vendita. The clergy is put too much in peril by it, that one can at the present hour permit oneself to play with it, as with one of these small affairs or of these little princes upon which one need but blow to cause them to disappear. Little can be done with those old cardinals, or with those prelates, whose character is very decided. It is necessary to leave them as we find them, incorrigible, in the school of Consalvi, and draw from our magazines of popularity or unpopularity the arms which will render useful or ridiculous the power in their hands. A word which one can aptly invent, and which one has the art to spread amongst certain honorable chosen families, by whose means it descends into the cafes, and from the cafes into the streets. A word can sometimes kill a man. If a prelate comes to Rome to exercise some public function from the depths of the provinces, know presently his character, his antecedents, his qualities, his defects above all things. If he is in advance a declared enemy, an Albani, a Polata, a Bernazzi, a Della Grenga, a Rivolera, envelop him in all the snares which you can place beneath his feet. Create for him one of those reputations which will frighten little children and old women. Paint him cruel and sanguinary. Recount regarding him some traits of cruelty which can be easily engraved in the minds of the people. When foreign journals shall gather for us these recitals, which they will embellish in their turn, inevitably because of their respect for truth, show, or rather cause to be shown, by some respectable fool those papers where the names and the excesses of the personages implicated are related. As France and England, so Italy will never be wanting in facile pens, which know how to employ themselves in these lies so useful to the good cause. With a newspaper, the language of which they do not understand, but in which they will see the name of their delegate or judge, the people who have no need of other proofs. They have in their infancy of liberalism, they believe in liberals, as later on they will believe in us, not knowing very well why. Crush the enemy, whoever he may be. Crush the powerful by means of lies and calumnies, but especially crush him in the egg. It is to the youth we must go. It is that which we must seduce. It is that which we must bring under the banner of the secret societies. In order to advance by steps, calculated but sure, in that perilous way, two things are of the first necessity. You ought have the air of being simple as doves, but you must be prudent as the serpent. Your fathers, your children, your wives themselves ought always be ignorant of the secret which you carry in your bosoms. If it pleases you, in order the better to deceive the inquisitorial eye, to go often to confession, you are, as by right authorized, to preserve the most absolute silence regarding these things. You know that the least revelation, that the slightest indication escaped from you in the tribunal of penance or elsewhere can bring on great calamities, and that the sentence of death is already pronounced upon the revealer, whether voluntary or involuntary. Now then, in order to secure to us a pope in the manner required, it is necessary to fashion for that pope a generation worthy of the reign of which we dream. Leave on one side old age and middle life. Go to the youth, and if possible, even to infancy. Never speak in their presence a word of impiety or impurity. Maxima debitor puero reverentia. Never forget these words of the poet, for they will preserve you from the licenses which it is absolutely essential to guard against for the good of the cause. In order to reap profit at the home of each family, in order to give yourself the right of asylum at the domestic hearth, you ought to present yourself with all the appearance of a man grave and moral. Once your reputation is established in the colleges, in the gymnasiums, in the universities, and in the seminaries, once that you shall have captivated the confidence of professors and students, so act that those who are principally engaged in the ecclesiastical state should love to seek your conversation. Nourish their souls with the splendors of ancient papal Rome. There is always at the bottom of the Italian heart a regret for republican Rome. Excite and kindle those natures so full of warmth and of patriotic fire. Offer them at first, but always in secret, inoffensive books, poetry resplendent with national emphasis. Then little by little you will bring your disciples to the degree of cooking desired. When upon all the points of the ecclesiastical state at once, this daily work shall have spread our ideas as the light, then you will be able to appreciate the wisdom of the council in which we take the initiative. Events which, in our opinion, precipitate themselves too rapidly, go necessarily in a few months' time to bring on an intervention of Austria. There are fools who in their lightness of their hearts please themselves in casting others into the midst of perils. And, meanwhile, there are fools who at a given hour drag in even wise men. The revolution which they meditate in Italy will only end in misfortunes and persecutions. Nothing is ripe, neither the men nor the things, and nothing shall be for a long time yet. But from these evils you can easily draw one new chord, and cause it to vibrate in the hearts of the young clergy. That is the hatred of the stranger. Cause the German to become ridiculous and odious even before his foreseen entry. With the idea of the pontifical supremacy mixed always the old memories of the wars of the priesthood and the empire. Awaken the smoldering passions of the Guelphs and the Ghibellians, and thus you will obtain for yourselves the reputation of good Catholics and pure patriots. That reputation will open the way for our doctrines to pass to the bosom of the young clergy, and go even to the depths of convents. In a few years, the young clergy will have, by the force of events, invaded all the functions. They will govern, administer, and judge. They will form the council of the sovereign. They will be called upon to choose the pontiff who will reign, and that pontiff, like the greater part of his contemporaries, will be necessarily imbued with the Italian and humanitarian principles that we are about to put in circulation. It is a little grain of mustard which we place in the earth, but the Son of Justice will develop it even to be a great power, and you will see one day what a rich harvest that little seed will produce. In the way which we trace for our brethren there are found great obstacles to conquer, difficulties of more than one kind to surmount. They will be overcome by experience and by perspicacity, but the end is beautiful. What does it matter to put all the sails to the wind in order to attain it? You wish to revolutionize Italy? Seek out the Pope of whom we give the portrait. You wish to establish the reign of the elect upon the throne of the prostitute of Babylon? Let the clergy march under your banner, in the belief always that they march under the banner of the apostolic keys. You wish to cause the last vestige of tyranny and of oppression to disappear? Lay your nets like Simon Bar-Jonah. Lay them in the depths of sacristies, seminaries, and convents, rather than in the depths of the sea. And if you will precipitate nothing, you will give yourself a draught of fishes more miraculous than his. The fisher of fishes will become a fisher of men. You will bring yourselves as friends around the apostolic chair. You will have fished up a revolution in tiara and cope, marching with cross and banner, a revolution which it will need to be, spurred on a little to put the four quarters of the world on fire. Let each act of your life tend then to discover the philosopher's stone. The alchemists of the Middle Ages lost their time and the gold of their dupes in the quest of this dream. That of the secret societies will be accomplished for the most simple of reasons, because it is based on the passions of man. Let us not be discouraged then by a check, a reverse, or a defeat. Let us prepare our arms in the silence of the lodges, dress our batteries, flatter all passions, the most evil and the most generous, and all lead us to think that our plans will succeed one day above even our most improbable calculations. And that ends the document. So in those few pages, there's a lot to unpack. We can see, though, that they knew this was going to be a very long-term plan because obviously it takes generations and generations to corrupt both faith and morals. And we've seen that happen here in the United States. It's the same plan. They went into the universities, into the public schools, and then they destroy generation after generation. It gets worse and worse and worse. They knew they weren't going to be able to accomplish this against the men who came back from World War II. They knew those generations would never stand for communism, socialism. And so little by little, they creeped into each institution. And they did the same thing to the church. They started earlier in the church because the church was a much more formidable enemy. And, we see it took them up to 1960, 1958 with the election of John the 23rd, when they essentially took over the Vatican, took over the papacy, when this came to fulfillment. Now, the popes were aware of the dangers of Freemasonry beginning in 1738. Pope Leo XIII writes about this in one of his 4 encyclical letters against Freemasonry. This quote comes from Humanum Genus, And he says, quote, "The Roman pontiffs, our predecessors, in their incessant watchfulness over the safety of the Christian people, were prompt in detecting the presence and the purpose of this capital enemy. Immediately it sprang into the light instead of hiding as a dark conspiracy. And, moreover, they took occasion with true foresight to give, as it were on their guard, and not allow themselves to be caught by the devices and snares laid out to deceive them. The first warning of the danger was given by Clement XII in the year 1738, and his constitution was confirmed and renewed by Benedict XIV. Pius VII followed the same path, and Leo XII, by his apostolic constitution, Quo Gravoria, put together the acts and decrees of former pontiffs on this subject and ratified and confirmed them forever. In the same sense spoke Pius VIII, Gregory XVI, and many times over, Pius IX." End quote. So the Pope since Clement XII up to and including now Pius XII, they warned against and fought against this Judeo-Masonic conspiracy. They did so in very strong and clear language. But all of this came to a sudden halt with the fraudulent election of John the 23rd, and then all the subsequent quote-unquote popes, or should I say anti-popes, since. And I'll cover that in a moment or so. But what I want to do here is go over just a few key lines in the Masonic permanent instruction of the Alta Vendita document, and then how the popes responded to it, then how the Masons accomplished their goals, and then where we find these Masonic principles in the quote-unquote church that came out of the Second Vatican Council, and then also how these principles have now spread out all over the world to a point where the common man thinks these are good things. This is what people are fighting for, right? Fighting for liberty and democracy and all these buzzwords. But what they show the public on one hand is very different than what it really means behind the scenes, behind the lodge door, so to speak. So let's listen to these first few lines, and then
Quote,
I will come right back.
"The Pope, whoever he is, will never come to the secret societies. It is up to the secret societies to take the first step toward the church with the aim of conquering both of them."
So the Masons took their first step toward the Pope. And really what they mean is that Pope that will eventually be elected by those generations that have been indoctrinated. But the first step to get to that point was by spreading all of these Masonic ideas throughout Europe. And at that time, obviously, it was just the printing press, and word of mouth, and also revolution. Revolution was a big part of it. And through revolution, they weakened or destroyed the monarchies. And then through those arms of the press and then of revolution, they helped to increase the corruption of morals and also weakening the faith, both through the corruption of morals and also putting out doctrine that is completely contrary to the truth, contrary to the faith, but done in a very deceptive way, in colorful language, and language that people that don't have a strong foundation believe, like what we're seeing today, all this move towards socialism with all these indoctrinated generations of the youth who don't know history, don't understand what the real end result is when it's been played over and over again throughout history. We know how this movie ends with these Marxist, socialist, totalitarian states. But the 1890 Jesuit article the video I did a few weeks ago goes over this corruption and how it was accomplished, through money and power, the power and money of the Talmudic Jews in union with the Free Masonic lodges. And we have firsthand experience of that here in the US and of course in Europe, in Australia, worldwide. You see the power of the Judeo-Masonic media to constantly broadcast lies, to indoctrinate people, constantly broadcast immorality, to destroy people's any type of grace from God, right? And then they block any dissenting voice, any voice that is going against their propaganda, against their immorality, so as to make them seem like they're virtuous. They're proposing ideas that are good, and anyone against it, is a domestic terrorist, is a racist, is homophobic. They have all the lines to completely squash any type of resistance. But the issue here is that you have to speak the truth, and you have to be willing to suffer for it, because that's what the martyrs did in the very beginnings of Christianity, the beginnings of the church, and that's what we still have to do. We have to carry on that militancy and that fight, and not give up, because we have the truth. We know what the truth is. We have the true faith, and let's face it, we're all going to pass away at some point. So it might as well be for the truth. It might as well be for Christ. Now, the three main principles of Masonry, and you probably know them, they came from the French Revolution. That's liberty, equality, and fraternity. We hear these over and over and over. They're emblazoned on the Constitution and on the money and whatnot. So it's drilled into our heads. They sound nice, but they have a double meaning. So there's one meaning that they present to the general public, what they would term as the unwashed masses, the uninitiated, right? But then there's the true meaning, which is part of their secrets. So liberty is essentially freedom from the law of God, freedom from the natural moral law, and freedom from the Church of Christ. And it just so happens, and it's no coincidence, that basically the number one rule in Satanism is do what thou wilt is the whole of the law, right? That is the so-called liberty. And it's the same liberty that Satan proposed to Eve. In the beginning, there was only two commandments that humanity had to obey, right? It was not to touch and not to eat the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. But then Satan came and preached to them liberty from those two commandments, those two laws. And it was the liberty that ended up enslaving Adam and Eve, and then as a result, all of humanity to the tyranny of the devil. And this is the light of Lucifer. The light of Lucifer is this liberty. That's why the Statue of Liberty is standing at the harbor with that light, right? It was created by Freemasons. The light is the light of Lucifer. It's liberty from God, liberty from the commandments of God and from the natural moral law. That's what it means, okay? And this is what the Masons mean when they say we have seen the light. It's also important to note that after the fall of Adam and Eve, if you look in the scriptures, it says they wore aprons. And this is one of the many reasons why the Masons wear the apron, right? So it's all diabolical. It's all an affront to God and an affront to truth. And, if you remember in the beginning of the video when John Venari is talking about the document falling into the hands of Pope Gregory the 16th, right? Well, he absolutely battered liberalism and Masonry in his encyclical letter titled Morari Vos. This is a must read. It will be a bit shocking because it crushes the idea of America, of the United States, of the modern world at large. But that's because we've been indoctrinated with this over the past 230 plus years. If we really put the starting point at the Satanic French Revolution, right? Liberty, equality, fraternity. That's where these buzzwords come from. What I want to do is I want to read a few paragraphs from it so you can understand the errors of liberty, equality, fraternity, the errors of the American Constitution, and so you can hear what a true Catholic Pope sounds like when he speaks and teaches with the authority of Christ and without any fear of the world, without any fear of the press, and without fear of the devil. I'm going to start with paragraph 11, and this starts on clerical celibacy, because this has been talked about, since mainly, within the quote-unquote visible church, since Vatican II, and I wouldn't be surprised if if Francis does end up putting something in place to completely destroy that tradition. Although it would never be destroyed, because he's not head of the Catholic Church. He's head of the Church of Antichrist. He's the vicar of Antichrist, right? They possess the buildings, they possess the bureaucracy of the church. They wear the robes, and this is all part of this Masonic deception. When they in the document it says, have them march under your banner, under your standard, and all the while thinking that they are marching under the banner of the apostolic keys. Now, this is all part of the deception. This is all part of the grand deception of the great apostasy that St. Paul speaks of, and that it's such a huge deception that, if possible, even the elect would be deceived. So let me go into the encyclical Letter Moralivos by Gregory XVI, and I'm going to start with paragraph 11. Quote, "Now, however, we want you to rally to combat the abominable conspiracy against clerical celibacy. This conspiracy spreads daily and is promoted by profligate philosophers, some even from the clerical order. They have forgotten their person and office and have been carried away by the enticements of pleasure. They have even dared to make repeated public demands to the princes of the abolition of that most holy discipline. But it is disgusting to dwell on these evil attempts at length. Rather, we ask that you strive with all your might to justify and to defend the law of clerical celibacy as prescribed by the sacred canons, against which the arrows of the lascivious are directed from every side." End quote. So I just wanted you to hear that paragraph, because I have a strong sense that Mr. Jorge Bergoglio is going to attack that at some point. Now, the next paragraph covers marriage, and obviously, for those of us in the world today, we know the horror of what has happened to the sacred sacrament of marriage, with now all sorts of perverts, quote unquote, being married, which it's not a true marriage, because it's not, it's completely contrary to the natural moral law. But in that, it's important to read this, because this is part of that quote unquote liberty. And so they start small and they chip away and chip away and chip away, and then it gets to this complete horror of what we're living in right now. And it's probably going to be where some people can end up marrying animals and God knows what next, because as humanity falls deeper and deeper into sin, it loses all sight of truth and all sight of beauty and what is good, and it just completely collapses. So let's just listen to what he has to say here on marriage. Quote, "Now the honorable marriage of Christians, which Paul calls a great sacrament in Christ and the church, demands our shared concern, lest anything contrary to its sanctity and indissolubility is proposed. Our predecessor, Pius VIII, would recommend to you his own letters on the subject. However, troublesome efforts against this sacrament still continue to be made. The people therefore must be zealously taught that a marriage rightly entered upon cannot be dissolved. For those joined in matrimony, God has ordained a perpetual companionship for life and a knot of necessity which cannot be loosed except by death. Recalling that matrimony is a sacrament and therefore subject to the church, let them consider and observe the laws of the church concerning it. Let them take care lest for any reason they permit that which is an obstruction to the teachings of the canons and the decrees of the councils. They should be aware that those marriages will have an unhappy end, which are entered upon contrary to the discipline of the church, or without God's favor, or because of concupiscence alone, with no thought of the sacrament and of the mysteries signified by it." End quote. And what does Mr. Jorge Bergoglio do? He wants to allow divorced and remarried Catholics to, what basically is just a wafer. The majority of the new masses are invalid, and even if they were valid, they're illicit. You're not permitted to attend them because it's not the Catholic rite. It's not a Catholic mass. But that's a subject for really another video. But we can see what Gregory XVI said was absolutely true, because more than half marriages fail because people have no respect for it, and that's why the Masons wanted to take over marriage and allow judges to marry people, and it becomes the power of the state and not the church. And so that's how they destroyed marriage. That's how we have sodomite marriage. That's why we have so much lawlessness now, so many children growing up without fathers, without proper discipline, without really proper love and education. And this breaks down the family, and this is how they then make the state God. And then ultimately it is Lucifer who is their God, and the God of the world, let's say. But let's continue. So paragraph 13, the pontiff says, quote, "Now we consider another abundant source of the evils with which the church is afflicted at present, indifferentism. This perverse opinion is spread on all sides by the fraud of the wicked, who claim that it is possible to obtain the eternal salvation of the soul by the profession of any kind of religion, as long as morality is maintained. Surely, in so clear a matter, you will drive this deadly error far from the people committed to your care, with the admonition of the apostle that there is one God, one faith, one baptism. May those fear who contrive the notion that the safe harbor of salvation is open to persons of any religion whatever. They should consider the testimony of Christ himself, that those who are not with Christ are against him, and that they dispersed unhappily who do not gather with him. Therefore, without a doubt, they will perish forever unless they hold the Catholic faith whole and inviolate. Let them hear Jerome, who, while the church was torn into 3 parts by schism, tell us that whenever someone tried to persuade him to join his group, he always exclaimed, 'He who is for the see of Peter is for me.' A schismatic flatters himself falsely if he asserts that he too has been washed in the waters of regeneration. Indeed, Augustine would reply to such a man, 'The branch has the same form when it has been cut off from the vine, but of what profit it is the form, if it does not live from the root?'" End quote. So what does the Second Vatican Council preach? What has Paul VI, John the 23rd, Paul VI, John Paul I, John Paul II, Benedict XVI, now Francis, they have preached completely contrary to this doctrine. It's undeniable. It's in their words. It's in their documents. It's not even something that anyone in the Novus Ordo can deny, because that's what the meetings at Assisi were. Look at the video I did on John Paul the Great Apostate, of him going and allowing all these false religions, these satanic religions, into Catholic churches, putting the Buddha on the tabernacle. It's all there on video. But then some might say, well, what about what he talks about St. Jerome, that he who is for the see of Peter is for me? Well, that isn't the see of Peter. That is not what Peter believes. That is not the true faith, what is being taught by Francis, by John Paul II, by Benedict XVI. It is not. It is a deception. Again, it's similar to what happened to the Jews in Christ's time. They saw the robes and the titles of the high priests of the Sanhedrin, and they clung to them as the truth. But they clung to them, and they clung all the way down into the depths of perdition. I am with the see of Peter. I am with all of the popes, but I am not with the popes who go against Peter and go against the voice of the shepherd for all of these 2,000 years. And so that is the situation we're in. This is the deception that we're in. And this is why I'm saying that the Masons have infiltrated the papacy. They have taken over the organs of the church, the physical, visible structures of the church. And it doesn't mean that the gates of hell have prevailed. They have not, because there are Catholics who still have the true faith. There are priests who are still validly ordained. There are bishops who are still part of the apostolic succession. And even if there is one true Catholic left on earth, there's, as St. Athanasius said during the Arian heresy, when the majority of the church and the bishops fell into the heresy, the church goes on. The church is triumphant in heaven anyway. So on that, I want to go to the next paragraph, paragraph 14. The pontiff says, quote, "This shameful font of indifferentism gives rise to that absurd and erroneous proposition which claims that liberty of conscience must be maintained for everyone. It spreads ruin in sacred and civil affairs, though some repeat over and over again with the greatest impudence that some advantage accrues to religion of it. But the death of the soul is worse than freedom of error, as Augustine was wont to say. When all restraints are removed by which men are kept on the narrow path of truth, their nature, which is already inclined to evil, propels them to ruin. Then truly the bottomless pit is opened from which John saw smoke ascending, which obscured the sun, and out of which locusts flew forth to devastate the earth. Thence comes transformation of minds, corruption of youths, contempt of sacred things and holy laws. In other words, a pestilence more deadly to the state than any other. Experience shows, even from earliest times, that cities renowned for wealth, dominion, and glory perished as a result of this single evil, namely, immoderate freedom of opinion, license of free speech, and desire for novelty." End quote. And what have we seen this past year and a half? Major cities in the US being destroyed by the very Freemasonic, communist, socialist ideals that have polluted this nation. But I'm going to end this video now. We're already an hour in, and going to have to do another part, maybe even 3 parts to this, because there's a lot to cover. But I hope you've learned a lot so far in this first part. In the next one, I'll go more into this religious indifferentism and liberty of conscience, where they appear in the Second Vatican documents and in the words of these Masonic quote-unquote popes. And I hope to see you in the next part. Thank you, and may God bless you all.